Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sports Speak. I'm your host Spencer Ripchik.
And I'm your co-host Tanyon Loose.
So, Tanyon, what did you think of the NFL championship weekend? Any surprises did you see?
I think the Chiefs game, obviously a little bit of a surprise for me. I thought for sure they were going to take the win, but I don't know. I was kind of surprised by Pat Mahomes' performance towards the end there. I thought he wasn't looking like himself. But the Rams game, not a surprise to me. I thought they were going to win by more, to be honest. But the Niners always figure out a way to keep it close. And I don't know. An enjoyable week of football. How about you?
I actually picked Joe Burrow and the Bengals to beat the Chiefs, but I also picked the Niners to beat the Rams, so double upsets. I got 1 out of 2, so that's pretty good.
Unfortunately, I was not that guy who correctly predicted both the scores to
win. I saw
$500,000.
That's nuts.
So, yes, but anyways, once again, we're not here to talk about football. We're here to talk about some Penn State sports.
Yeah, and as we start all these off, we're going to start with our favorite news of the week. So, Tanyon, why don't you get us started off for this week?
I think my favorite news this week is a first for the podcast here. We're going to track and field news, which is one of my personal favorite sports as a former track athlete. So, Katie Jones on the women's track and field team broke the pole vault record for the women's track and field team that she already held. So she's now raised the bar to 14 feet. So that's the new record for the team. And I've always admired the top tier pole vaulters. It just looks kind of scary to be up there that high, just at the will of the pole. So I don't know. I'm sure they're not going to fall backwards if they're this good.
Yeah.
But I always was like, wow, what would happen if you just came right back down? Guess
snapped.
Hopefully don't land on your feet. But yeah. And then other track news that I wanted to throw in here is freshman Allison Johnson has been having kind of just a stellar season so far for the team. She's number 2 in the, she's tied for first actually in the NCAA in the 800 meter. So she's second alphabetically. But yeah, she ran a 2:04, so she's tied for number 1 indoors, which is kind of just insane as a freshman, especially with a lot of people returning from those COVID years and stuff like that. And she's number 17 in the mile. So great stuff from the Penn State women's team this last 2 weeks here.
Yeah, and my favorite news this week is Penn State men's volleyball took down the number 3 Long Beach on Saturday, which we kind of talked about them a little bit last week, and should they be worried or not? Looks like they shouldn't be worried about them at all. Yep. Similar to the Bengals, the Nittany Lions clawed their way back into the game being down 2 sets. Penn State didn't start off great, like I said, with a couple of errors in the opening sets to give Long Beach an early jump, but sophomore middle blocker Toby Ezioni led the way with 16 kills, 0 errors, and a 94.1% hitting percentage. Now the Nittany Lions are 5-3 on the season, and the Blue and White will host Princeton and George Mason this weekend, which should be 2 solid matches.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. So for our next segment, we're going to kind of go to a little bit of a recurring topic here on the podcast, which is the Penn State wrestling team. It's kind of hard not to talk about them when they're the top team in the nation and really one of the great dynasties in recent history, kind of across all of collegiate sports. But we're going to switch it up a little bit this time. Usually it's Spencer asking me some questions about it, considering that I cover the team. But we're going to do a little bit of a 180, and I'm going to ask Spencer some questions this week because he once again watched his second wrestling match against Iowa. So I'm going to start us off here with Spencer, did the duel live up to your expectations? I know we talked about it on the podcast a lot.
So actually, I don't have anything prepared for this because I thought I was going to ask you, but that's actually better, I think, because I think it definitely did live up to expectation. I think it was really, really close there in the late stretch of the thing. So, yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting. I don't really know too much about wrestling, but from what I saw, it was a very competitive game or match. So, yeah.
This could be real interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Right off the dome.
Spencer, once again, what was your favorite match that you saw?
I think it had to be Max Dean's match, right? That was pretty much the swinging point of the whole match altogether. I think where he's about to look like he snap his leg or something. I thought that was very gruesome, and I didn't realize wrestling would get that violent. Yeah, it kind of reminded me of UFC a little bit.
There's some positions that really are shifting the weight there. Yeah, that was obviously the big match. They kind of deciding one there, but there was a couple that I liked. Obviously, really, you can go from top to bottom.
Pretty good, yeah.
It was just what an incredible betch there. Between you had the RBY match with Austin DeSanto that he really was on the defensive a lot, and then he just found a shot, took it, got the win like you would expect him to do. Nick Lee looked great.
Yeah,
the Carter Starachi match was arguably the match of the year across all of wrestling. Going into tiebreaker periods like that, both of them looked on the top of their game. And I'm just excited, I think, for the future. So then I got another question. It's just like, what did you think of the environment that you saw out there? I mean,
I thought the place was absolutely nuts. And again, I feel like if maybe it was in the BJC, I would have been able to go. But I feel like I've never seen like something get so packed. And I think it would have actually filled the BJC if it was here, unlike most Penn State basketball team games that don't really actually fill it. So yeah, I thought the environment was really, really cool. I thought the Iowa crowd is very good, and I mean, there's a lot of Iowa supporters. Iowa's big into wrestling, and it's their big sport. So, yeah, I thought the environment was great.
It's definitely a big thing there. I mean, we got the BJC match coming up this Friday against Ohio State, so we'll have to see if the attendance matches there. I think it was the attendance record actually came from the first Penn State BJC match when they wrestled Pitt. So we'll have to see if they can kind of create a similar environment to Carver Hawkeye this weekend when they take on Ohio State. Unfortunately, it wasn't the Iowa or Michigan match this year. Those are the two highlights. But I mean, Ohio State is a solid team still, and I know Penn State fans love their wrestling, so I'm sure it's going to be quite the environment. I'm excited to be there. So yes, and then finally, I've just got one final question for you. Do you think this Penn State team is as good as we've kind of made them out to be over these last couple episodes here?
Well, I mean, if you look at the past two matches, they beat Michigan and they beat Iowa. So I mean, there's not really any team that can stand in their way right now. I mean, Oklahoma State has looked pretty good from what I've heard, and so has NC State. I know my dad's been hyping them up because they have a couple of local kids from my area on their team. So yeah, but looks like they're the most dominant team in the Big Ten so far, as I can see.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Oklahoma State coming off that tough loss to UNI, I know. So I mean, it looks like Iowa and Penn State are kind of surging to the top here, and it's just going to be even more fun to see how these two teams kind of lay everything out down the road, Big Ten championships and NCAA championships.
It kind of reminded me of, and bringing back to football, Georgia, Alabama this year, where light years above every other team. So kind of similar to that.
Exactly.
But on a team that needs work, unlike the Penn State men's wrestling team, the Penn State men's basketball team has been struggling as of late. So, like we did with football, we're going to make a fantasy basketball team of Penn State athletes. So, Tanyon, do you want to start us off with who you have at point guard?
I think I'm going with a little bit of a curveball here with my point guard spot. Someone that you might not think of as a stereotypical basketball player here, but I got Evan Dorenkamp from the cross-country team and the track team. He's their best distance runner. So, I mean, he might not have the height or be your traditional kind of shooter there, but I think that I want my point guard just to be able to run all game long and just hound the opposing player. I want him to push in transition, be up in the other point guard's face the whole game. So I think if you got a guy who's one of the top endurance athletes in the country, no reason why they can't do that. So I went with our cross-country star here.
Yeah, with my point guard, I have TJ Malone, similar to you, of the men's lacrosse team. He's a real game manager on the lacrosse field, and hopefully that translates to basketball. I don't really know. He's also really quick, and he's got a lot of stamina. He runs up and down the field all the time. So he could drive to the hoop if he needed to, if he really wanted to. And, yeah, he's got a lot of stamina, especially in lacrosse where you need a bunch of stamina.
Yep. Moving to shooting guard, I got Joe Nastasi, who is a 6-foot-tall pitcher for the baseball team. I don't know, it's just me, just personally in my experience, I found that baseball players are just good shooters. I don't know why, if it's the
Throwing the ball.
Kind of the arm, just got it trained there, and they just know how to make a ball go where they want it. So that, and his father played wide receiver at PSU, so clearly the athleticism genes are there. So I think he can be a shooter, but also a good athlete out there on the court. So we got a track and a baseball player to start us off here.
Yeah, and going back to that, I mean, Michael Jordan did play baseball and basketball, so I mean, there you go. It must translate a little bit. But I have, speaking of wrestling, a shooting guard, Roman Bravo Young. I mean, he definitely lacks the height for a basketball player, but he's very, very fast, and he's a little guy, so I feel like he can bob and weave in there, and he's just overall a solid athlete. So that's why I stuck him in there.
Yeah. Going to small forward, I don't know if I may have cheated it a little bit here. I went with a football player here. I got Malik Mega, who's a 6'4" wide receiver. Yeah. For the football team, so I'm thinking if he can go up there and high point a football, he can go high point a lob and throw it down if I'm throwing this to him. So I think that was a pretty good option there. He's got the height, got the hand skills. I'm sure if you're playing D1 wide receiver at a Power 5 team, you gotta be pretty darn athletic.
Yeah, and my shooting forward, I went with Joseph Cardina, the high jumper on the men's track and field team. I thought it was pretty hard to find a small forward for this team, so I thought, why don't I just look at a NAB player that can really jump? And He has a 1.96 meter high jump, which is around like 6'4" or something like around that. And he also earned a varsity letter in basketball, funny enough, and in high school. So, I mean, he has some experience to him.
Yes, I can confirm that he's actually pretty good at basketball, given he went to high school right near me. So he may have made a good choice there. I kind of overlooked that one. So going on to our second to last position here at power forward, I have, once again, another football player. I got Tyler Warren. He's 6'6", 252. But given that he can play both tight end and quarterback, I got to think he has a pretty versatile skill set. I think he may be able to stretch the four a little bit, be like the stretch four that a lot of teams are kind of implementing now, or even the stretch five in some cases on some teams nowadays. Like everyone wants to shoot the three. So I think if he's got the size that he can kind of play down low, but he can also maybe stretch out the floor a little bit and play outside if he's got that quarterbacking skills, got that arm talent. So I think that he could be a good option there.
Yeah, I went with for my power forward, I went with the baseball route. I picked Devin Fletcher, who's a pitcher on the baseball team. He's 6'8", 215, so he's a big body. I feel like most of the power forwards in this day and age are just massive athletic dudes. So I feel like I just wanted to put him on there just so he could just drive to the hoop and take some bodies with him. So, yeah.
I only ever caught a Penn State baseball game. That's got to be quite a wind-up there.
Yeah.
If you're 6'8", got to have
215.
quite the wingspan. Jeez. All right, moving on to our center position, I think, and we're probably going to go somewhat of a similar route here. I have Toby Ezioni, who we just talked about a little bit. He's a 6'7" middle blocker for the volleyball team, and I think the name gives it away there on the blocker portion.
Yeah.
The name, if I want a defensive presence out there on the court, so I think he's the guy to get it done. He's got the height, and he got a huge game like you just talked about. So clearly, he's on top of his game right now. He's got the athleticism, and he's got that competitive drive. And he showed it the other night.
So the Penn State men's basketball team has been lacking size, and they've been getting outsized. I mean, and so at my center, I pretty much just went with the tallest person on the men's volleyball team, and Ian Argento. He's 6'9". I mean, I pretty much took the tallest player, and I stuck him at the center position. I mean, you can just throw him lobs, dunk on people. I'm sure he can dunk. I mean, he can jump over, or not jump over, but block over the net. So yeah, I just pretty much took tallest player on a team that should have all tall players in the volleyball team.
Yep, indeed, they look pretty good this year. So I think we're going to move on to our first preview now this season. I mean, we're kind of rolling around in the spring season here for a lot of spring sports kicking up. So this time we're coming with a men's lacrosse, who, I mean, they didn't exactly have the greatest season last year, and I think they're obviously looking to bounce back. So me and Spencer are going to kind of go over kind of their positions a little bit, look at their schedule, and kind of just talk through what we think this season is going to be kind of going with. So I'll let you start.
Yeah, so it's definitely a younger team this year. They have some older players, but the highlights for the younger part are Sutton Bowen and Grant Haas. They're definitely going to have to lead that team. A lot of players left. Nick Cardio, Mac O'Keefe, Gerard Arceri, Colby Canese, Dylan Folds. So they lost a defender, two attackmen, a goalie, and their face-off guy. So, I mean, they have a lot of literally missing a star at every single position. A big name this year, I feel like, will be TJ Malone. I mean, the offense will have to run through him with no Mac O'Keefe. Last season, he had 25 goals, which is just 4 shy of leader Mac O'Keefe. So, and last year, he was pretty much the second guy to O'Keefe. So I feel like this year he's going to have a big year.
Yeah, I was looking at TJ Malone a little bit as well. I mean, he was eighth in goals per game last season in the Big Ten, which, I mean, it's a pretty solid conference, maybe outside the ACC at the top there. So, I mean, that's pretty solid number. But then you look after him, and looks like there's going to be a big drop-off in production this season. I know they have 7 freshman attackmen on the team this season, so I really think that it's going to have to be some of those guys that step up. I know they've brought in a bunch of pretty good recruits who've come from solid kind of high school programs, a lot of them prep guys. So, I mean, you got to think that at least some of them will hopefully work out for Jeff Tambroni's squad this year, because, I mean, they had the same problem last year where they were near the bottom in the Big Ten in goals per game, and I think if they once again have that problem, they're just going to find themselves in a little bit of a repeat of last season, which I know is the last thing that team, its coaching staff, is going to want.
I have a couple people that could fill in. I mean, Alaric Fayak, he played in goal last season, so I mean he should be able to play. He actually started over at Colby Canese a couple of times, so I mean he could just be a plug and play player and just fit right into that role. He did struggle sometimes though when he was in that, which put Colby back in. And Jake Glatz will also replace Gerard Arceri, who was Penn State's go-to face-off guy, and he also saw some action last year. So, I mean, they have some experience at those two positions in actual game experience. But, Yeah, they're definitely going to need some offensive help, I think.
I know, yeah, that's for sure. And I think I just looked at a couple other positions here, like talking like midfield again. They got only really two guys that I can clearly see brought them a lot of production. And they have Jack Kelly, who's a fifth-year senior, so I think I'd imagine he'll be one of the leaders in this team. He was a third-team All-American in 2019, so I mean he had a great year then. I don't know if his production has kind of fallen off a little bit since then. They have a sophomore Mark Sickler, who had 5 goals, 7 assists last season, which is pretty solid in a little bit of a reduced year, kind of, where they didn't play as many games. I think that's pretty good for a guy who didn't start every game and kind of just integrating into the team a little bit. So I think, but it's a similar situation in the midfield and on the defensive attack, where there's some experience on the roster, but then there's kind of just a gap there a little bit that they're going to rely, I think, on a lot of freshmen and sophomores to kind of fill some vital roles in this team that maybe they might not be comfortable doing that early in the season, but they don't really have a choice at this point. But I think a lot of where some of the issues may lie is just frankly in their schedule. I mean, it looks just absolutely brutal. I mean, the Big Ten is pretty solid. I think they got, let me pull up the rankings here. It's second overall is Maryland in the preseason rankings. 10th is Rutgers, and 15th is Johns Hopkins in the preseason rankings out of the top 20 teams. Ohio State's also there getting votes alongside Penn State, who was just outside. But then you also just look at the other teams they're playing, and there's Yale, Penn, Cornell, and Vermont are all ranked teams in the preseason pool, and they've had to play all of them. So, I mean, it just looks like there's just no breaks in the schedule where it's like time to decompress and maybe kind of lick your wounds a little bit if they ended up losing to some of these top teams. It's just kind of gauntlet the whole time you're playing team after team.
Yeah, it's definitely a brutal schedule, and I feel like last year they had the luxury of just only playing Big Ten teams as of the COVID situation. But I mean, even last year, the Big Ten was pretty tough with like Maryland, Rutgers, and then they lost to Johns Hopkins in the Big Ten tournament, which was an upset. But overall, I feel like last season was not the season Jeff Tramboni wanted, and I don't feel like this season won't be too much of a change, just based on their schedule and based on the players that are missing this year.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it could really be a little bit of a tipping point for this program. I think they had some really great years, kind of maybe 2-3 years ago, and then these last couple of years, year or two, just haven't been probably what the coaching staff would like its program to be at. And I think if you maybe throw in a second or third straight year of kind of subpar performance, that kind of maybe sends a message to recruits that this was kind of a one-hit wonder type program. So we'll have to see.
Well, that's all we have for this episode of Sports Speak. We'll be back for another episode next week.
Yeah, if you like this podcast, just please consider subscribing to the Collegian YouTube channel. And thank you guys. Have a great week.